Hi, I'm James Brookes, and welcome to From the Factory Floor, a conversational podcast about all things startup and tech, brought to you by the folks at Thestartupfactory.tech. And Happy New Year to everyone, and welcome back to another episode of From the Factory Floor. I'm very kindly joined today by, I think it's after a little bit of a hiatus, Ian, welcome back.
Hello, good morning.
Good afternoon, good evening, good night.
Mm-hmm.
And Nyree. Hi, Nyree.
Hi, how are you?
Very well, thank you. I mean, it's been a while since we've done one of these, I think. So,
yeah, I thought I'd done something wrong.
Well, you usually have, but I don't think on this occasion you had. I think we've just had a bit of a break to recharge and work out some ideas for some things that will actually help some founders out. So, I think today, I think there's one really key focus we wanted to have a look at, which is all around KPIs and objectives. And obviously, Ian, that's something that you deal with on a day-to-day basis when you're dealing with the startups we've worked with. And obviously, they move through having their MVP and actually start the business journey and how they begin to look at actually running a business full time.
Yeah, it's quite funny actually, because I think I'm quite good at helping other people set goals and objectives, and not great at setting them for myself. If I'm honest, I sometimes lack a bit of discipline. But yeah, I mean, I think it's part of every founder journey that they need to set and achieve goals. They need clarity and a focus on what they are. They need to get the team aligned, and obviously they need to measure progress. And I think KPIs and having a KPI dashboard, if you just put to one side the buzzword aspect of that, they're just like traffic lights and indicating your progress. And I think they are pretty important to have a set of metrics which are measuring progress towards milestones.
Yes, it's quite interesting because obviously we started doing a lot with some of our startups and making sure that they are making progress and making progress in the right direction as well, because it's very easy for startups, especially in early phases, to start looking at the wrong things. So I guess it's probably the best place to start is actually when you're actually making your KPIs or OKRs or whichever method you want to particularly use for that. In your experience, how do you analyze what you should be looking at in the first place before even looking at what figures you should be aiming for?
Yeah, I'm sure Nyree's got a point of view on this, because for me, everything should lean into customer development, sales, and marketing. I think there are a few challenges that a lot of founders have. I mean, you can measure anything, but just because you can measure something doesn't mean that it's relevant. And obviously, folk have their own bias as well, and the common vanity metrics, which we'll talk about. So I think you need to take a stand back and kind of look at what your North Star is, and look at the drivers of your business. And I think there's three things really. One's about momentum, the progress you're making. Are we moving forward? The velocity, the speed at which we're moving forward, and then the measures themselves. What are we targeting? And I think if you get those three principles around the pillars of your business, and then making sure the metrics are owned and there's clarity on them, because at the end of the day, you want to be using the metrics to be making decisions. So again, it's just not, oh, we've got a great set of KPIs. It's asking yourself, so what? So what are the questions that you're asking? And to your point, James, are we going to prioritize product and customer growth? Are we going to add new features? Are we removing a feature? Are we changing pricing? Are we hiring? I think you need to kind of measure in the moment, but also measure medium and longer term. So what are the forward-looking lead metrics? And have a dashboard which really covers, for me, simply user interest, user conversion, with your kind of set of standard financials. But I think everything really should be, as a startup, looking at and leaning into customer-based KPIs.
Yeah, I agree. I think essentially building your customer base is the only thing that's going to move your business forward, isn't it? Because so many founders get obsessed with securing funding, but it's very, very rare, if not impossible, to secure funding if you've not got a customer base and you've not got the sales to support that. Because who's going to invest in a business? Essentially, it's not a business if you've not got a customer base and sales. So I think one of the things we see a lot with founders, and I think social media, LinkedIn, etc., doesn't help here at all, is the metrics of success, if you were to believe what you read and see on LinkedIn, is around securing funding, getting up at 6 a.m. and having a sea of champions and well wishers. And like Ian said, that then becomes vanity metrics. Now, if your business is trading and you're now looking at growth, it might be that funding is securing funding is absolutely essential for you, and therefore your KPIs should support that. But that becomes one of your KPIs. It's not the only one, and it should never be at the detriment to sales and customer base and growth. So I think one of the things we're really keen on is to try and keep, and we always refer to ourselves as being very pragmatic, keeping founders' feet on the ground, and helping them to establish the KPIs that genuinely are going to help the business to grow, rather than the KPIs that perhaps the media might tell you that you should have, and lead you down the garden path. And essentially, when you're a founder, you don't actually have a lot of time because you're wearing all the hats. You've got to make sure that you're using your time wisely, to do the things that move your business forward. And I think, Ian, we know, don't we, if we had a pound for every time we heard from a founder where they said, they've got a pipeline of 150 leads, but really they're cold leads because they've bought the data but not followed it up, or um, they've now got 500 people on Instagram or 500 people on the LinkedIn page. They're just connections, they're not customers. And they've become obsessed and put the time into the wrong things. It's so easy to do when you've not got somebody there keeping you accountable. Um, so it's something we're really passionate about, to try and help founders keep the feet on the ground and keep the business moving forward.
It also feels like connection. People need to remember connections aren't clients.
Yeah.
And I think very much, especially in the early days, it's about, I think we said it a few times, getting out the building, looking especially at your sales metrics early and going, how many outbound calls I'm making, how many of those are converting, how many of those are then churning at the end of the month. Because it's those that really drive the cash flow at the end of the month. And then eventually, hopefully, you start looking at that and how you're improving. And that's when you can target the specific KPIs, whether it's your churn's too high. Is it actually like you said, Ian? Do you need to look at higher to then be able to make more outbound calls and more connections that way to then turn those into clients?
Yeah, I think the pragmatism is one of our it's in our DNA, isn't it? And it's kind of, let's celebrate success and enjoy it, but actually keep your feet on the ground. I think that's a really good sentiment, Nari, especially around this issue of KPIs, because, if you're measuring the wrong thing, it means you are kind of potentially heading in the wrong direction. So you do need to understand what's going to move the business forward, and it is all about customers. I think, we've got 150 leads. Well, again, I think use a CRM tool which actually tracks the progression of those down the funnel. But in actual fact, things like cash flow, even where everyone goes, oh, what's your cash burn? Well, your cash burn is actually an outcome. It's an outcome of activity and progress. So there's not a lot you can do to influence your cash flow unless you're actually really attacking the front end. So, if you look at SaaS businesses, looking at MRR, revenue per customer, number of new customer wins, they're the real things you should be tracking. And you need some measures behind that, which also drive activity. And again, can be a kind of a very, very romantic notion of how many people have you touched this week? Well, I've emailed 150. Okay, so how many of the 150 have come back to you? So you can still have a dashboard which tracks relevant metrics, but unless you're actually doing the work, then you're just keeping a record of what you've done rather than the outcomes, really. And I think it's also important you actually recognise how you need multiple time frames, multiple metrics across different dimensions of your business, but all kind of stack up in a pyramid that are simple but linked towards that goal. If it is generating £1 million of revenue, what are the drivers of that right through that sales funnel, right through marketing? So, your marketing metrics could be your marketing qualified leads, the number of events we said we'd been to. So it's very pragmatic about activity and outcomes for me. And then the old SMART, rules apply: specific, measurable, actionable, relevant, and time-based. Again, be very focused on what period of time you're looking at these things and what you can deliver and what you can achieve.
Yeah, I think I think that's one of the challenges with whenever if you are the business owner and actually setting your own KPIs, is that specific, making them measurable, because sometimes it can be very easy to get sidetracked. I would say there's a lot of vanity metrics that people can look at to convince themselves they're doing a good job, and sometimes it's hard being a startup founder. I think we all know that. So actually looking at something that makes you feel good about yourself can actually be a bit of a benefit. But like you say, it has to be driving the business forward. So what, in your experience with some of the startups we've looked at, what are some of the challenges that people have had? Is it more around that KPIs aren't stretching enough, in terms of actually setting themselves goals based on that? We made 30 phone calls, it converted this many, so this week we're going to make this many. Is it that people are overstretching, understretching, or just is it generally that people do tend to look at the wrong thing entirely?
I think it's a combination, James. I mean, we're all human, and I kind of opened this session by saying at times I'm not great at setting my own objectives. We all enjoy doing the things we enjoy, and at times we default to that. You look at your to-do lists, and inevitably the hard things remain on that list for a couple of days at least, and the easy things you do, and you think, oh, I've done 6 things today, but they were the stuff that you should have knocked off in a couple of hours. I think there's a couple of things for me. One is your own bias. I think setting your own targets and your own objectives is actually quite hard. The benefit of working with someone like TSF is that we've got experience of a broad number of startups in different domains, different activities, different focus, and therefore we can kind of channel what are the right metrics to measure and define, and equally within that, what is an appropriate target. So I think you have to have some clear objectives and a target. And if we continue the conversation around, outbound sales activity, then I think it has to be stretching. And again, in our experience, the successful startups are successful because they're founder-led sales. And I think that's one of the key things that, again, aligns to the thread of everything that we've done in the last few years. So if you are outward facing and looking at your market, customers, and then really being challenging. So, if in year 1 you set yourself an objective to win 50 customers who are going to spend, on average, £2,500, straight away you've got a number of customers and you've got a value there you can start to track. And what's the activity and the focus to drive that number through your funnel and to secure that. So I think it's the right metrics and the right time frame. Stretching, I think we all, it has to be measurable, it has to be achievable, but equally it can't be too easy. Otherwise, the growth curve you're not going to get there. Equally, I think, lead and lag. So leading in terms of what we need to be doing, and then the outcomes are measured by the lag KPIs. So I'm really kind of clearly in Nyree's camp around marketing activity and focus. Sales targets, average days to close a deal, number of active leads we've spoken to this week. What's the average lead value? How many new accounts have we opened? And again, you don't want too many, but all of these you can capture in a CRM, and then just filter them into a dashboard that you've got the traffic lights and which dials do you need to move. But fundamentally, it's about honesty. It's about having the right ambition. But then it's actually working with other people to kind of give you that direction, give you that focus too.
I think the other thing is, for a startup, you're working by yourself. It's really hard to hold yourself to account, isn't it? So you can set out your objectives, etc. But I think human nature is, that if you haven't necessarily been following those, or you've not got anybody checking in once a month to ask, where you're up to with them, it's really hard, and then you can easily kind of get distracted and create a new objective, or um, something that's, like Ian said, a bit more in your kind of comfort zone. And I think, again, what we're trying to do is build up that community of startup founders, which we can talk about. Excuse me, the webinar that we've got coming up over the next week, and we probably will run throughout the year. But there is that opportunity to get founders together, and what one person's set of KPIs are for their startup is going to be very different to another's. So I just talked about, I was a bit dismissive about number of LinkedIn followers or number of Instagram followers. But if your business is a social business, and that's going to be your main channel, then that is a KPI that you need. And you do need to spend a lot more time creating content and getting engagement across that channel. But if your business is a platform, or it's a B2B, do you need to be spending a huge amount of time on Instagram making your brand look good, or should you be would you be better spending your time creating collateral for following up B2B meetings, or B2B lead generation? So what's right for one is not right for the others. And I think this is where it's about understanding your business, and knowing where you're trying to get to, and knowing essentially your KPIs are the 5, 6, 10 things that are going to help you move your business forward.
So I think on a more practical point of KPIs, because we mentioned there's so many different ways, and depending on what your startup is, they're always different. How often should startups be actually analysing the KPIs? Is it something on a weekly basis, a monthly, board meetings, and then how typically do you see startups actually action those successfully?
I think there are things which have different time frames, James. I think your sales metrics are weekly. On the start of a week, you've got a sales plan, you've got an activity plan, you've got some outbound activity, you've got an event, you've got marketing. So I think that needs to be on a weekly basis. Financials, I think, revenue per customer, number of customer accounts opened, the financial elements, I think, can be monthly. Product development, could be linked to milestones, your product roadmap. I think it's very much reiterating what Nyree said. Create your own dashboard that is relevant to your business model and the milestones that you've got across those pillars of your business. I think delivering new features and tracking that every week. Yes, the tech team will have measures that they'll be monitoring, but from a business point of view, in the next month, in the next quarter, what's the roadmap saying? So I think you need to fine tune it so that it works for you. And talking to other founders and other startups, I think, is always a good anecdotal, peer group learning opportunity. So you kind of create a matrix and a mix that work for you. I think in terms of driving it, then I think if you've got a team, having ownership of individual or sets of the KPIs within the team, I think is important. It's kind of a shared ownership, creates a collegiate, collaborative feel, but also kind of harnesses the feel that we're all focused in the same direction. We're all pulling together. So I think KPIs act as a good team alignment tool as well, to track progress. So I think assigning KPIs to the right person, but actually having a team-oriented approach to measuring them is key. The founder will have personal metrics. I think I indicated earlier, founder-led sales. Excuse me. I think I said earlier, founders will have their own set of metrics, personal to themselves, and their own metrics for their activity. So I think there's a whole combination of things, and that's really what we'll talk about at the webinar next week. I did write a blog a couple of weeks ago, which is on the Thestartupfactory.tech website, about a pizza restaurant startup. and some kind of calamity you can have around measuring the wrong things, and indeed missing measuring the right things. So anyone that's interested, have a look at that blog and then come along to the webinar next week. But yeah, I think it's about finding the right fit of 6 or 10 metrics that are relevant for you, but having the ability to drill down then into the individual detail behind them.
Yeah, we'll link both of those to this. So if anyone is interested in joining us for the webinar, what date is it, Nyree, for the webinar?
It's on Wednesday, which is the. Well, I should know this, shouldn't I?
It's the 25th, I think.
It's the 25th, sorry, yeah. So it's on Wednesday the 25th. We'll be running the webinar. The plan is that hopefully we'll keep people in kind of a bit of an accountability group. So we will check in over the next couple of months, just to see how people are doing. I expect that we will run it again throughout the year, because I think founders do sometimes sort of fall off the wagon with the KPIs, or just feel that they need them resetting. Obviously, the business changes direction, etc. So it's always worth, looking at those. But I suppose, just to reiterate, we've got a huge amount of experience in terms of setting those KPIs or helping founders set those KPIs. We understand different startups and businesses. What's right for one isn't right for another. So I do think it will be hugely beneficial to anybody that attends. And if you're not able to attend, then hopefully this podcast has been really informative as well.
Yeah, just a couple of things to kind of close from me, really. One of the key things people get fixated on is absolute totals, whereas for me it's about measuring the change. What's momentum, what's velocity, what's progress. So measuring the change and using your KPIs to determine what's working now, what's not working, what do we need to flip, and I think throwing it forward. What the KPI is telling me about my next 10 days, my next 10 weeks, my next 10 months, kind of tracking and looking at trends, I think is quite important, not just the absolute. And equally, the probabilities, what if. So measuring something actually doesn't tell you anything in its own right. It's how you interpret that and how you take that interpretation into a set of actions. So I think it's an essential part of a founder toolkit. But then it's kind of asking yourself, so what? What's it telling me? What do I need to do? What should I do? What are my options? And this constant curiosity and asking questions. The focus shouldn't just be on KPIs themselves, but asking questions to get to the meaning and what the drive is behind them, what's the impact, what are the consequences, and what do I need to do? There's an old phrase about how do I move the needle. And I think that's quite relevant to KPIs in terms of if it's not moving, what we're doing isn't working, what do we need to change? So they are just indicators, as they say. They kind of there to kind of inform you, but they don't give you the answers.
No? Nyree, any closing thoughts from yourself?
No. The only thing I was going to say, I will find a link for it. I had an old boss that recommended a book called "Will It Make the Boat Go Faster?" I don't know if you've read it.
Yes,
it's really good, isn't it?
Ian's probably read it.
Yeah, Ian probably wrote it. But it's two Olympians, and they basically, as they were training for the Olympics, I think said every question they made is, will it make the boat go faster? So if it didn't make the boat go faster, they didn't do it. And it is a business book. It's the mentality of it. But I always go back to that and think, is it going to move the business forward? Not going to move the business forward. Why are you doing it? When you're a startup, you haven't got time, the luxury of time, or the luxury of a team to be dabbling in things that are not going to move the business forward. So I would definitely recommend that book as well if people are interested in it. But it is a question, like Ian said, you should continue to be asking yourself as well, is it going to move my business forward? If the answer is no, don't do it.
Yeah. And that's how you can track your progress. In terms of actually using the KPIs to then see actually has it moved the business forward and then stopping doing it. It's not to stop you from actually trying things, because you have to try things and experiment to be able to make progress. But your KPIs are your guidance that actually this hasn't increased our sales, or it's not decreased our churn, as an example.
Yeah.
Yeah,
excuse me. Sorry, I was just going to say we've seen businesses, haven't we, that on paper you think would be hugely successful. Big social media following, enter a lot of awards, etc. But the reality behind that on the balance sheet would tell a very different story. And what defines success and what defines a business? It's sales and customers essentially. Who those customers are depends on what type of business you've got. But I think there's an element of finding camaraderie in your fellow founders, but equally not getting distracted by what they're doing as well.
Yeah. A closing thought for me is if you kind of relate the analogy of a pilot to a founder, the pilot is in the cockpit, he's looking at the direction they're going in, he's looking at the altitude, looking at the speed, looking at the fuel gauge. He's got a handful of key things he or she needs to be focused on. And that really applies to a KPI dashboard as well.
Okay, well, I think that kind of wraps us up for today. Thank you very much, Ian and Nyree, for joining us.
No, thank you. I'll see everyone next week for the webinar.
Yeah, we very much look forward to seeing everyone there. And if not, we'll hopefully catch you on the next podcast. Thanks for listening.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
I think that just about wraps things up here. If you have any thoughts or questions on anything we said today, get in touch, whether that be through our Twitter @RealTSF or email at hello@Thestartupfactory.tech, or feel free to drop in for a coffee and a chat. As ever, thanks for listening.